Hello, everyone. We'll just wait a few minutes for everyone to join us. Okay, let's get started. I'm going to share my screen. So please let me know if you don't see it. So before we get started, I just want to say thank you to UKLTA for hosting this webinar today. A few house cleaning issues first. If you have any questions or anything, just please feel free to type it into the chat box and I will be happy to get to them at the end of the presentation. I am Kristen Avon. I'm the Senior Legal Officer here at Vaultinum. For those of you who aren't too familiar with Vaultinum, we are a European trusted third party established in 1976, and we specialize in the protection and audit of digital assets. So we offer different services from IP deposits, software escrow solutions, and technology due diligence. Today, we will be discussing the importance of carrying out a technology health check, whether you're preparing for an exit, an investment, or the next round of fundraising. So we're going to talk about why technology health checks are growing in importance, how it benefits small and medium companies, what it involves exactly, and finally, how you go about one practically. So what is a technology health check? So a technology health check, also known as technology due diligence, is a process of evaluating a company's technology assets and capabilities to reveal potential issues and opportunities. It often uses an automated tool that analyzes the source code of a software. This provides valuable information about the quality, maintainability, and overall reliability of a software. So either an investor, buyer, or the company themselves can initiate a tech health check, and this often hands the advantage to one side over the other. So within the technology industry, it has been common practice for as long as companies have been acquiring other businesses or entering partnerships. In the late 90s, as the technology sector grew in importance, the term technology due diligence began to gain widespread usage. And nowadays, technology due diligence is an important part of many transactions, mergers and acquisitions, fundraising, investment, and buying or selling a business. Why has it become more important? Because today, more than ever, IT systems are fundamental to business operations and processes. Even non-tech companies depend on technology and software as key productivity drivers. The tech may even comprise a business's crown jewels, that is, their most significant assets. This also means that it's an acute source of risk. Historically, companies have often neglected tech due diligence, but this is much less common today. On the investor side, overlooking this aspect can negatively impact post-deal financial results. And on the company side, a thorough tech health check can contribute to a more accurate valuation, aid in negotiations, and in general help maximize the return on investment for all parties involved. So on this side, we have some numbers from Accenture on the view of technology due diligence in the UK. So over here on the left, you have 89% of CEOs saw tech integration and M&A transactions as a growth enabler and as a source of competitive advantage. 41% carried out tech due diligence for most of their deals over the past 3 years. On the right, we have the chief information officers, who almost unanimously said that conducting tech due diligence uncovered issues or opportunities that made a material impact on the deal. What makes undergoing a tech health check even more important is the present economic strain that we are finding ourselves in. So this is meaning in terms of debt availability, costs of capital. In general, the environment is much more competitive. And with more tension on the market, investors are exercising more scrutinies over deals. And this has a particular focus on the technology. Because as I said before, while technology is a great indicator of growth prospects, it can also be a hidden minefield of risks. So it's safe to say that buyers and investors are looking deeper into a company's tech. But looking deeper doesn't mean having no risks. It means having awareness and a plan. Most investors aren't interested in these ivory tower approaches. It is our experience at Vaultinum that most are comfortable taking a level of risk if they can see that there are mitigation plans in place and that risks are well understood and that there is a plan in place to manage them. So, how can technology due diligence help companies bring more value to their technology? Well, it can do this in several ways. So first, it identifies potential liabilities. So the source code scan of a technology due diligence can uncover hidden technical debt, architectural issues, or potential legal problems that may pose risk to investors or buyers. For example, a poor approach to cybersecurity will impact the overall valuation. In the realm of private equity, they'll knock off 20% of the value right off the bat. Or it may be discovered that your software integrates open source software copyleft that restricts its usage so that it's not commercially viable. Second, after identifying these risks, such as security vulnerabilities or any non-compliance with industry regulations, the company is now in a position to address these issues before they become a liability. As we saw in the previous slide, 97% of CIOs that underwent a tech due diligence in the UK uncovered issues and opportunities that had a material deal impact. So this gives companies seeking funds a chance to address these issues and make the technology more attractive to potential investors and partners. This, in turn, contributes to a more accurate valuation of the company, because by understanding the true value and potential of your technology assets, you're able to make better decisions on how to develop, package, or market the technology. Essentially, knowing your worth will help you to extract the greatest value. It also helps you improve the likelihood of securing a deal. So having a thorough understanding and being able to provide transparency on your technology assets makes it more attractive to potential investors. Also, having already had your tech checked out in advance can speed up the overall deal-making process and better positions you for success by preparing in advance so that you can showcase the significant areas that bring the most value. A good tech due diligence report will show how you fare as compared to your industry and size. It will be able to highlight your strengths while also giving estimated times of fix it for areas that may need improvement. So basically, having this report in hand will save the investor time, resources, and also demonstrate your seriousness. And finally, it helps lay the foundation for long-term success. The due diligence process will also evaluate the scalability, maintainability, and overall stability of your technology, which is essential for investors to be able to gauge the potential for growth and long-term success. Let's transition now to talk more on the risks identified by a source code scan during a tech due diligence, as well as its impacts. So here we have three main areas of analysis. Cybersecurity. This means we're looking at questions such as, are there any known vulnerabilities that can open the door to potential data breaches or other threats? Do you practice good hygiene? Does your company have the minimal protective measures in place? For intellectual property, do you actually own the software? Or do you integrate copyleft open source licenses that affect this ownership? Are you able to use the software as intended? And finally, software maintainability. Are there code quality issues? Are there obsolete technologies that are no longer supported or could be out of date? Is there knowledge distribution risk? High technical debt? These are the types of questions a technology due diligence is built to answer. Let's start by looking more deeply at cyber risk. So it is without question that cybersecurity is one of the greatest threats faced by companies today. It is very hard to open any news source without reading about a new malware or ransomware scheme. In the past few months in the UK alone, we've seen the NHS ransomware, the Guardian data breach, the Royal Mail crisis. This slide highlights just three of the biggest cyber crimes in recent memory. I have selected these three to showcase that a tech health check would have discovered these vulnerabilities. First, we have the hotel group Marriott. So they discovered a colossal data breach back in 2018. It was traced to a cyber intrusion that occurred years earlier in a hotel group that it acquired, Starwood. Yeah. So Marriott was subjected to numerous lawsuits and regulatory actions across multiple jurisdictions, costing them tens of millions of dollars. You see, Marriott didn't just acquire a company, it acquired their cyber defects, and they were ultimately liable for them. Next, we have the Colonial Pipeline. So this is the largest refined products pipeline in the US. It controls 45% of the fuel consumed on the US East Coast. Hackers gained access through a VPN used by employees working remotely. However, this VPN did not have multi-factor authentication, which allowed the hackers who had previously obtained valid credentials to access their network. So I don't know about everybody here, but just for me to be able to sign into my work computer, even when not remote, I have to approve it via an app on my phone. So it seems like an obvious cyber measure to have in place, multi-factor authentication. But here it was, an important critical infrastructure exploited by a relatively easy hack. Lastly, we have Wintermute. So this hack involved a series of unauthorized transactions that transferred around 70 different cryptocurrencies to the attackers' wallets. They did this by exploiting a vulnerability in the open source software profanity package, which basically recomputed the private wallet keys. Finding vulnerabilities in open source takes a notoriously long time, which makes it especially dangerous, but discoverable. Last year was the second year in a row that the UK topped the cybercrime density list, a 40% growth compared to 2020. And it's not just big companies or critical infrastructures like we saw on the previous slide that are being targeted. 45% of attacks target small and medium companies. This is according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And unlike larger companies, small and medium enterprises have limited cyber defenses. And for businesses of all sizes, the average cost of disruption is around $200,000. For small companies, this cost can be insurmountable. And they say around 60% of small and medium companies go out of business after being victimized. Cybercrime losses due to existing software vulnerabilities rose 64% in just a year. And when I talk about losses, it's not just ransom paid out. We're talking about opportunity costs for the income lost when a resource cannot be used, reputational consequences stemming from brand damage, loss of trust from customers resulting from a data breach. There's also reduced efficiency. They say organizations lose on average 9 working hours when experiencing downtime, and many other costs related to litigation, insurance, rate hikes, criminal investigations, and so on. Another good way to understand how big cybercrime has become a major problem is by the amount of money and focus that various organizations are pouring into that area. For example, last year, Google committed $10 billion over a 5-year period to fund a program to strengthen cybersecurity and secure the software supply chain. And in 2021, 17% of Fortune 500 companies that appointed new board members selected people with cybersecurity experience. That's up 8% from 2020. So companies with weak security or existing vulnerabilities, they pose a huge risk for both investors and buyers, as we saw with Marriott. But a technology due diligence can identify these issues and offer them reassurance. So while most companies, I think we can safely say, have a good understanding of what it means to protect against cyber attacks, they know less about identifying vulnerabilities in the source code. So source code vulnerabilities can leave the window open to a cyber intrusion, as we saw in particular with Marriott and Wintermute. A source code scan reveals a variety of information, including some of the things mentioned here on this slide. They can also reveal any deficiencies in the software development process that could lead to security vulnerabilities. This could indicate a lack of code reviews or a lack of testing for security issues, as an example. Here on this slide, we have a concrete example of a technology due diligence where the investor actually reassessed their investment based on the high cyber risk revealed by the source code scan. So this is nothing compared to Marriott. This is a small, relatively small company, but which you will see failed to put the certain minimum cyber measures in place. So the vulnerabilities detected here pointed to several potential threats: insufficient access management, insecure interfaces and API, risk of accidental client data disclosure, and cloud storage data exfiltration, all of which led the investor to rethink the value of this investment. To recap, assessing your cybersecurity practices can only help you and leave you in a better position in the case that we just saw. Moving on, we are going to now look at intellectual property. So if an organization deals in technology services or production, control of intellectual property is paramount. For example, if a software is built on source code featuring open source components, but the license requirements of those components have not been followed, then there is the risk that the entire piece of software could become open source, affecting the overall business's value. On this slide, we have a couple of important statistics. 75 to 90% of today's software is composed of third-party code, including open source software. So why is this? Why is so much code directly belonging to open source? Well, the thing is that open source code is constantly being developed by hundreds of developers, bringing high efficiency and high innovation to the company, but you have to be conscious of the risks. I'll put it to you another way. Not using open source software is like as if you were a construction company, and in order to construct your condos or your malls, you must first build all your own tools. That means building your own bulldozers, cranes, hammers, and nails. It's absurd to think about. And similarly, it's impossible to build software from scratch every time. And pretty much as soon as you have to interact with a user, it cannot be done from scratch. And this is why it's really no surprise that in 2021, 77% of organizations reported an increase in the use of open source software. A medium-sized application, this means less than 1 million lines of code, carries 200 to 300 third-party components on average. And according to Debricked, it takes over 800 days to discover a security flaw in OSS. For example, the log4 shell vulnerability, which you probably all heard about, went undiscovered for over 2,600 days. But let's back up for just a moment. What makes open source software so risky? Well, very briefly, open source software is made up of software libraries, modules, and other components that are either purchased from third-party vendors or made freely available. Open source does not mean that the code is in the public domain, okay? It's not this no strings attached type of relationship. It simply means that it is freely accessible and usable under certain conditions. And these conditions are found in the terms of the license attached to the open source. And there are different categories of open source software, with some being more restricted than others. Today, we will talk about the riskiest of them all, the copyleft licenses. So a copyleft license can make it mandatory to distribute all the source code of a software based on a copyleft work upon its release to the public. Essentially, copyleft ensures that any attempt by an organization to use open source work in a commercial venture isn't viable. And it is estimated that some 16 billion lines of code are licensed under GPL v2, which is one of the riskiest copyleft licenses. So why does identifying it matter? Well, if a company cannot identify all their open source code or dependencies, they are likely unable to ensure that they are in compliance with these licenses. And this puts them at risk of intellectual property infringement, business disruptions, and reputational consequences. These are all things that will absolutely affect the value of the deal. The majority of intellectual property law in the open source realm relates to license compliance. And indeed, lawsuits and injunctions are growing in frequency. There was a recent class action lawsuit that you may have heard of. It was filed against GitHub, its parent Microsoft, and its AI technology partner, OpenAI. Apparently, they used the code of open source programmers in order to train Microsoft's AI tool. The lawsuit alleges that such use violated the open source license conditions and is claiming $9 billion in damages for intellectual property rights damages. Next, we have Panasonic Avionics. They also got into hot water for OSS non-compliance, but they opted to settle with CoKinetic for an undisclosed amount. But more often than not complying with open source software licenses results in business disruptions, and these can be very severe. Much of the enforcement in the open source realm are carried out by the community or authors of the open source, and they're known as the enforcers, let's say. So these enforcers are often approach the violators in order to obtain compliance. If compliance is being demanded, a company must decide whether to release the source code under the GPL license, for example. This means they have to reveal their IP, or re-engineer the product, which means taking away resources from product development and focusing on bringing the company into compliance. A well-known example of this occurred with BMW. So a private citizen and enforcer happened to notice a GPL license in BMW's program. They wrote to the company demanding compliance with the license and essentially asking BMW to release their source code. BMW denied the request. So this private citizen published the parties' correspondence and this quickly went viral in the OSS community. Eventually, BMW folded and released the source code. So how does a tech due diligence source code scan help these situations? So not only will a source code scan identify all the open source code in the software, it will also highlight dependencies and outdated versions. On this slide, we have another case study of a client that was referred to us by their lawyer. This company had discovered on their own copyleft code that was integrated in the software which they commercialize. Upon review, we noticed right off the bat that the assessed company lacked an OSS inventory. This means that they lacked insight into how OSS was being used, and they had poor visibility into the OSS dependencies. Indeed, they were non-compliant with an important copyleft license, which would have the effect of them releasing the source code of their commercialized software. What their lawyer probably understood, and probably why they were recommended to us, was that there is never just one rogue copyleft license. It's very true. Where there's smoke, there's fire, and that was precisely this case. In the end, the specific open source copyleft that they were violating happened to also offer a commercial version. But as you can imagine, they weren't in a strong negotiating position, and they went from a fully proprietary software to one that is now highly dependent on a commercial software. But it could have been worse. One of their clients could have discovered the issue and demanded the source code of the software, and they would have had to release it at no cost. The takeaway here is that it is extremely difficult to operate any company at scale without open source software. So it's there, and it needs to be identified early on, given the risks involved. And these risks is that deals may be slowed down, devalued, or occasionally unsuccessful. Companies are able to get ahead of all of this and reassure an investor or buyer, because these guys, they do not want to acquire a lawsuit or reputational risk. And certainly their insurers counsel will not want to provide insurance without a clear picture of OSS issues. Okay, so now we have looked at cybersecurity and intellectual property. Lastly, we're going to touch on software maintainability, the risks, impacts, and what a technology health check can reveal. So when we talk about software maintainability, we are referring to the ease with which a software system can be modified to correct defects, improve performance, or adapt to a changing environment. High maintainability means that a software system is easy to modify and understand, and that it has a low cost of modification. Poor software maintainability has many negative consequences, as you see here. First, we have increased costs. So if a system is difficult to modify or understand, it can take longer to fix defects, make improvements, add new features, and this all leads to increased development costs, as well as delays in delivering new functionality, for example. Poor maintenance also means that it can be more prone to defects and bugs, which leads to decreased reliability, increased downtime, and this also negatively impacts the user experience. It also limits the ability to scale. So if it cannot be easily modified or extended, it can't be, or it's difficult to have it scale up to meet increased demand or add new features. This will limit the growth potential of the software overall, as well as the business that depends on it. Also, if the software system does not meet regulatory or industry standards for security and privacy, for example, it can result in compliance issues and financial penalties. There's also the risk of security vulnerabilities. Poor maintainable code can be more easily exploited by attackers and result in data breaches or financial losses. And finally, if a software system is difficult to understand and maintain, it can be less attractive to potential developers. This will make it harder to retain existing ones, leading to a shortage of resources and increased turnover. Here we have examples of large companies that suffered the consequences of poor software maintainability. On the left, we have Equifax, which in 2017 suffered a major data breach that exposed the personal information of millions of customers. The incident was attributed in part to a failure to patch a known security vulnerability in the company's software. Southwest Airlines ran into a lot of trouble last Christmas holiday, with over 70% of their flights being canceled over a week-long period. Much of this was due to old and poorly maintained technology, which they have vowed to update in the aftermath of this debacle. And then a few years ago, the Target Corporation, a large US retail chain, suffered a data breach that exposed the personal information of millions of customers. This incident was due in part to poor security practices, including the failure to segment the company's network. So a technology due diligence code scan will identify many of these issues before they become bigger problems. Now I'm going to walk you through another case study that focuses in particular on poor software maintainability. So the first thing you may notice here is that there are a lot of colors on this slide. Well, each color represents a programming language. And there are way too many programming languages in this technology. Why is this an issue? You see, if you multiply too much the programming languages you use, it's like a company where your staff talks 10 different languages. Things will get lost in translation. How do you even begin to manage a team like that? Either you have the resources, every manager speaks those languages, or you try to keep things more simple. This is also a problem of attracting developers. It's already difficult, for example, to find people who are perfectly bilingual, let alone trilingual or quadlingual. This slide highlights another key issue of maintainability, and that is knowledge distribution risk. People who develop software leave, and they do not always leave well-documented code. So it can be a jungle for the new developer to go in there and figure out what the new piece of code does. In red here, we have developers that are no longer active. And as you can see, the only person who can speak all 3 languages left the company. This also creates a vicious circle. High turnover leads to worse maintainability, leading to more people leaving. And in the end, it becomes harder and harder to modify the software. By understanding your strengths and weaknesses in respect of software maintainability, you will give yourself a head start in showcasing your important assets. So now I'm going to transition. Now that we have seen what a little bit of what a tech due diligence can do, how do we go about one, practically speaking? So on the company side, you want to take the necessary steps to prepare for an investment so you can get the most value out of your technology assets. So this is not unlike selling a house. would you rather sell a house that's been left stagnant for several years, no new updates or refurbishings, or would you rather sell one that's been lived in, but clean, modern, with all the defects known by the owner? Nowadays, you have realtors who bring in whole teams to conduct stagings, take professional photos, add a new coat of paint, because this type of preparation adds real tangible value. So if you're interested in maximizing the value of your technology, then you want to do some house cleaning. So practically speaking, how does one go about a technology due diligence? First, it's very important to prepare. The more time spent preparing, the better the company's chances are of securing favorable terms, reducing potential risks. And this may also ultimately lead to a more successful investment outcome. Preparation means assembling a team that includes the technical, legal, and business professionals, and gathering all the relevant documentation such as source code, architectural diagrams, technology stack details, security policies, all to prepare for a tech health check. Next, you want to use a technology due diligence software. It's not really necessary to spend tens of thousands of pounds on a consultant firm or audit company when there is technology that can improve your technology. So a typical process I show here involves 3 main steps. So you have online assessments. These are essentially there to help you get a view of how each area is managed and to see the issues that can't be spotted by a source code scan, like whether or not there is an OSS compliance policy in place. Next, you have the source code scan, which we have gone over in detail. And lastly, a debriefing and review of these results with expert recommendations and a suggested action plan. Lastly, you want to address the risk throughout the process. So the expert recommendations will help you to decide whether to implement a remedy, whether the cost makes sense, or whether to create a mitigation plan. By following these steps, a company can use these results to help inform strategic decisions, refine the company's value proposition, and ultimately strengthen its position during fundraising, investment, or exit negotiations. So this brings me to the end of my presentation. I want to thank you very much for your attention today, and thank UKLTA for having us. I will see if we have any questions. Let's see here. Oh, doesn't seem that we have any. Well, thank you all so much for joining me. It has been a pleasure. And thanks again. Have a great day, everyone.